Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachigian, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Frisch. Jeremy is the owner and director of Achieve Performance Training in Clinton, Massachusetts. He's the former assistant strength and conditioning coach for Holy Cross University, where he worked directly with the men's basketball team, men's soccer, men's and women's lacrosse, baseball, softball, field hockey, tennis, and women's track and field squads. Prior to Holy Cross, Jeremy served as a strength and conditioning intern at Stanford University, and he was also a member of the football and track teams during his days at Worcester State and Acton College. Jeremy is somebody that I've been following for a long time, and frankly, this conversation was long overdue. We have been corresponding via email for years, but this was actually the first time that we've chatted this extensively. Jeremy's message is especially important considering that children are getting more injured, less healthy, and busier, but not necessarily more productive. Coaches like Jeremy can't be reserved for the collegiate and professional ranks. They're more impactful at the youth and scholastic levels. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on. We were talking offline, and this has been a long time in the making here. So I wanted to begin by asking you a little bit about how you developed an interest in long-term athletic development and coaching youth athletes. I remember following you even maybe 10 years ago online, and that was when you were a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. And even back then, you were writing more about developing general athleticism and not just focusing on weight room movements. So I think you were a little ahead of your time in that regard. And now, like I said, you're focusing more on training youth athletes. So how did you develop that interest from a college strength and conditioning coach to somebody who's focused more on long-term athletic development?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because there was a time when I was pretty much like I was going to be a big, college strength and conditioning coach or, NFL. That's where I was heading. That's where I was going to be. I had my backpack with super training in there and I knew everything and that's where I was headed. And it's kind of funny because I did an internship at Stanford working with a lot of their teams. And then when I got home, I started, I kind of needed a job, and it was right around the time, I think it was around 2004, 2005, there was quite a bit of facilities starting to open up. I think there was Velocity and those type of training facilities were starting to sprout up. And there was a couple guys in the area that opened up you familiar with the high-speed treadmill and the skating treadmill? I think it used to be called Prepare.
Yes.
So these two business guys, they left the business world and opened this gym up. And I literally drove by one day. I saw it. I walked in. I said to the guy, I just left Stanford. I was an intern there working with all their athletes. The guy's like, all right, I got a group coming in of 10-year-old kids in an hour. I want you to coach them. I was like, sure. So I jump in, coach the kids up. He thought it went well. He hired me right there. So I started working there, and I did basically, they have this program called ground-based training, which is basically, it's just a fancy term for speed and agility. And so I would do group after group, 6, sometimes 7 different sessions, right in a row of young kids, anywhere from 6 all the way up until 18, throughout the day, every day. And I was getting burnt out. And I remember there's a guy named Dave Jack. He's a pretty popular guy on fitness, a friend of mine. He was kind of helping out there a little bit too. And I'm like, Dave, I'm getting burnt out. I'm training all these kids. I deserve to be training. I know everything. I should be training all these top collegiate athletes and this and that, So years go by. Him and I actually ended up working together at a different facility. And it was a similar type of training that I was originally doing, but it was probably more football biased. We had a lot of football players coming in, high school, college. So I was starting to kind of, I guess in my mind, moving up the ranks a little bit. And being there, I got exposed to everybody. I mean, we had adults coming in, we had little kids coming in, we had, we had obviously college athletes coming in. We even had some pro guys coming through the door. And so I was there for a few years, and I had a opportunity one day. I talked to Jeff Oliver at Holy Cross, and he said he may have a position coming open, and did the whole interview process. And so here I was on my way to, being a college strength coach. And I was really excited about it. And I loved it. I loved working there. And it was great 2 years. But I noticed working with a lot of those athletes that, one, I didn't have a lot of time because their schedules were so rigorous, as far as it's a very academic school. So I didn't get to see the kids as much as I thought I would. And I also felt that there was things missing that I couldn't go back and fix. So I started really looking into it and seeing all right, well, if movement skills kind of not where they need to be when they're 18 or 19 or 20, where do we start to develop those movement skills? If it's too late to develop those type of things, where do we start to do it? And I started researching. And then kind of around the same time, I started having children. So I had my first son right before I got the Holy Cross, and then my second one. And so watching them kind of develop and me wanting to be around them as much as possible to ensure that they're exposed to everything that they should be exposed to as far as movement and athletics and all that stuff. It all started kind of coming together. And in one summer, I had an opportunity to basically, because when you're at Holy Cross, it's only a 9-month appointment. So summertimes you have off. So I was only working a summer camp in the morning. I had an opportunity to start my own training program right in my own hometown. And so I started with high school kids, and then a few high school kids started coming in. Then we started, middle school kids started coming in, and it really started to expand. So by the end of the summer, I had to make a decision what I was going to do. Was I going to go back to Holy Cross or, kind of keep going, doing what I'm doing on my own? And so I made a decision. My wife we just had a baby. So it was nice because I could stay home more. I could be around. And I realized okay, I can do this. I really want to start focusing on getting younger and younger athletes in and really, work on the basics. Because I think if we can really instill those early, those kids will have much higher level development later on. So that's kind of my long-winded answer to how I got into it. And then as you and I were talking about earlier, my kids, I get to kind of see them go through this kind of long-term athletic development. They're basically a big experiment, I guess. Sounds funny to say, but everything I learn, I can try out on them.
Right.
I can do it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how it all came to be. And over the years, I think I've been open 6 years. We've had, like I said, I started with high school and then middle school, and now my kids are in elementary school. So, their friends wanted to start coming in. So we started developing different programs for different age groups. And if you look through if you looked on the board that we have and checked out the different types of workouts that we have or the training sessions that we have, they're all different. They're all geared towards, that specific age group. So yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Cool. And then, what do you think is unique about training younger athletes compared to the college and pro athletes you're used to working with? Or is it not even really that different?
Yeah, it's different. You know what? I think the really important thing with training young athletes, or the unique thing, is that you need to figure out what their maturity level is. So, for example, they all have different types of maturity. You'll have a kid who maybe, let's say he's in the 6th grade, but physically he's in the 8th grade. He might be a big, strong kid. But emotionally, he may be only in the 4th grade or the 3rd grade. You know what I mean? So it's you have to kind of figure out, you can't really just look at a kid and say, oh, this kid's in 8th grade or 6th grade, but he has the body of an 8th grader. We can start doing, squats and cleans with them, and we can start training them like more of a high school type athlete, because you don't know what's going on inside. So you need to get to know those kids and kind of figure out from that because it's not going to last. They're not going to take the training if their emotional development or their, how they perceive things is not in place with what you want them to do. So, I'll give you a great example. We have a 5th grader who comes in right now, and he warms up, and every afternoon we have a group of middle school kids that start off at 4:00, and he comes in with that group, and it's 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And just to kind of give you a rundown of how the session works, we warm up with kind of fundamental movement skills, skip, hop, shuffle, back pedal, just basic stuff. We do it every day. It's boring, it's tedious, but we always do it. And so From that, we move on to maybe like a mobility type movement. We'll work some Spider-Man stretches, some reaching, some balance. It's real simple stuff that the kids can, that's not too hard to teach with that age group. And then from there, we move on to like movement skill. So we're going to be crawling, bear crawls. We're going to be doing different types of hops and jumps and sticking the landing. We might do medicine ball throws, things like that. So it's pretty organized, and at the end of that, we usually work on speed and agility, more technique type stuff, stopping, starting, twisting, turning, backpedaling. We want to see them in doing athletic movements. And then from there, the kids usually will go, and the older kids will start doing their strength training. Like this fifth grader, he's kind of not really loving the strength training yet. I taught him how to do goblet squats, inverted rows, simple push-ups, walking lunges, like real basic stuff. And he's not loving it. He just doesn't take to it yet, because I don't think he's on the level, intellectually yet. So he goes, there's a group at 4:30 that comes in, and those kids are just like hitting the obstacle courses. These kids are younger. So we got second, third, and fourth graders. So these kids are like hitting obstacle courses. They're playing tag. We're doing relay races. We're just ripping around. And that kid wants to do that. So his heart's kind of still, in elementary school, even though physically he's in middle school. You know what I'm saying? So it's trying to find the middle ground of what this kid needs, and so he's happy and he feels comfortable in the training environment. So that's the biggest thing, is looking at different levels of maturity and trying to figure out where each kid fits.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then, as more of a general statement, what do you think that most kids need more of from a developmental standpoint that they're really tend to not be getting right now?
Well, you know what I think in starting, we can go right. I can go right for the beginning if you want, but there's things that parents can do the moment that their child's born, like putting the baby on their belly on the floor, just so it starts to learn its environment and move around and lift their head and get really strong. Like there's stuff like that, and then from there, once a child starts to grow a little bit, just making sure that they get outside and they get access to just like plenty of movement, climbing and crawling and wrestling and all those movements they really kind of set a great foundation. But really what's happening now is in schools is that there's such a push for academics, even in kindergarten, that the children are not getting the enough movement that they need day to day. And so, and it's both sides. It's the free play where they would be like outside running around. There's not enough recess time. And so they're not running around chasing each other, playing tag, climbing up the, going up and down the slide, going on swings, all that type of stuff. There's not enough of that, but there's also not enough phys ed. They have phys ed, like I think at my kids' school, they have phys ed like once every like 8 days or 9 days, something like that. It's crazy. So they're not getting enough phys ed, which phys ed years ago, you actually were taught how to move. You worked on fundamental movement skills. You learned how to skip. You learned how to bear crawl. It wasn't just going out playing a game, or a sport. You weren't just playing wiffle ball or kickball or soccer. You actually did some movement. I can remember being a kid and we used to do like all kinds of crawling and crab walks and all things like that. And sprint. We used to sprint because we would chase each other, doing different drills. So I don't think children are getting enough of that stuff. And then to put one more thing on top of it is that now we're asking children to start organized sports earlier and earlier. Like we were just talking before. I mean, they have T-ball starting at age 4 and 5, where I didn't start playing baseball, I don't think, until I was like 3rd or 4th grade. So, and when you have that, when you have kids start to get really specialized early, and that's what happens. Like you can play soccer, you can play fall, then you can move indoors and go play indoor soccer, and then springtime comes and you start playing outdoor soccer, and then summer comes and you start playing, you start going to camps all summer, and before you know it, 1 minute you're 5 years old playing soccer every, all year round, and next thing you're 9, next thing you're 12, like, and you've missed all these opportunities to develop a foundation of like really varied movement skill. So, and then people like, nah, that's not how it happens. It really does happen that way. You know, you see it all the time. I have kids that come in who are 12 years old who can't skip because they've done nothing but play soccer. I had a group of, I can remember when I was at Holy Cross, and these guys, you know, this soccer team, the men's team, like a couple guys came in, they went to the national playoffs, and we had like 3 kids that couldn't like skip efficiently, you know? So right up through from the beginning, right up through, you know, into college sports, you're seeing kids with just not all around good coordination and you know, developed movement skills.
Yeah, you kind of talked about how a lot of the things that kids need, they're not getting because now it seems like adults and even schools are so fixated on like sterilizing the environment because everything's dangerous, right? The monkey bars are dangerous. Wrestling's dangerous.
Yep.
And we're trying to inoculate kids so much to the point that they're so fragile. So then you kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you elaborate more on, so what happens when you end up working with these high school, collegiate, and even professional athletes? What is the result of this lack of incomplete development that they're getting early on? How does that manifest itself when you're getting them at a higher level?
I think when you start to see injuries start to creep up on kids or on athletes, you can probably trace those back to maybe missing out on those developmental years. You know, I think there's some kids are just wired to be great athletes, and they move really well. But then when you get them in here, and I mean, take, you know, whether it's the FMS or, you know, the PCA or whatever, you start to slow things down a lot and ask them to do, you know, can you balance? Can you shift your weight on one leg? Can you lunge? Can you do those? Can you crawl? And you start to see, you know, I usually, whenever I get a kid in and I start to, God, this doesn't look right, you know, and I break things down and slow things down, you start to see, oh, well, maybe it's because he's not coordinated enough. Maybe it's a coordination thing. Obviously, you start to see, you probably see it as well, like, you know, just athletes coming in so bound up, you know, especially football guys, they like at bench pressing for years and years, and their shoulders are just jacked up, or their hips, you know, things like that. And even still, those guys are still crazy explosive and strong, but I don't know how resilient they are, right? I don't know how long they're going to last. Can they take the pounding? So I usually spend, you know, when even the older kids that come in, I spend 15, 20 minutes every session going over all that basic stuff, you know, movement skill work, skip, shuffle, hop, you know, things like that, crawling. We do a lot of army crawling, like on their belly. We have like this kind of smooth surface, like a wrestling mat, and we teach them how to like kind of slide across the floor, and it works on like hip mobility and coordination and all things like that. It's interesting because, you know, you'll see a college kid doing some of that stuff right next to, like, you know, I have a 4 or 5 or 6 year old in that I need to work on, you know, that may be having trouble in school, and you know, they're doing the same thing. So you know, I spend a lot of time, you know, hurdle mobility, just getting guys to step over things and duck under things, which if you look at hurdle mobility, when I see guys stepping over hurdles and ducking under hurdles, I just think of like when I was a kid in the woods, like running through the woods, like ducking under branches and stepping up on rocks. And that's what I see when I see those guys do it. So for me, it's like, all right, well, we're kind of taking a step back and allowing these guys to do things that they should have been doing years and years ago, you know? So
yeah, no, for
and
sure.
There was a great article that Dan Paff wrote years ago. I think it's like, I read a lot, so I forget some of the names of the articles and books, but it was like alternative methods of strength, mobility, and power, or alternative methods of power, strength, and mobility. It's basically, when I read that, it's a philosophy that I pretty much follow. You know, it's almost like if someone came to me and said, how do you think and what do you follow? If I would give them that article, every intern I've ever had, I'm like, read this first, because this is where you start. And he talks about like how a lot of his athletes, even in track and field, get specialized too early, and they have issues later on as far as injury or movement, you know, not being able to learn the proper technique or what he wants to learn. And so he makes them go back through these like med ball circuits and hurdle mobility circuits and jumping circuits and all these things to kind of instill and kind of reboot and reprogram what he wants, so he can build of that the way he wants to do it, as far as technique and training goes. So that article for me, it sits in my backpack, and I take it everywhere where I go, because sometimes when I need to take a step back and kind of remember where I'm going, or where I came from and where I'm going, I always read that. It's a great article, and obviously, he's a smart dude.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to check out that article, and I'll put it on the link to the podcast. So you talked a little bit about early specialization, and you're very vocal about it in your writing. And so I want you to expound on that, because pretend that I'm a parent, and I say to you, look, every other kid that my kid's competing against is playing Little League, 10 months a year and throwing 100 pitches every 3 days. And, if little Johnny doesn't do what these kids are doing, then they're going to surpass him. And I think that's, it kind of makes some intuitive sense, but I don't think it's the complete story if you're thinking more long-term. Like, yes, if you want little Johnny to be the best at baseball when he's 10 years old, that might make more sense. But so what should our message be to parents and even sport coaches who might subscribe to the logic that more is better at a really early age?
Yeah, I mean, my message is always, and honestly, for us in the strength and conditioning world, like, we all get it. We all talk about it, and we're like, yeah, when each of us talk about it, we like totally, cheer every guy on, because like we all agree. But when you're talking to like an adult or a sport coach, especially a club coach whose like life depends on, who he makes money off of training kids year round, and you try to explain to them like, hey, listen, the reason why you guys were really good at, age at U9, but now you're not so great at U13, you got to kind of, it's tough. It's not easy. It's not an easy conversation to have. You're also talking, you got to realize you're talking to parents that U9, U10, U11, U12, they just dropped a lot of money on their kid to practice with, that lacrosse team or that baseball team or that that soccer team over the years. And so it's tough to break it to them. You know what I mean? And the other thing is, there is this, I also try to explain, you never know what's going to happen once kids hit puberty. Some kids are late bloomers, and they're not going to come around until they're like, 15 or 16. And those kids are going to get cut at U9. But later on, they're going to end up being better than everyone else, because they're going to grow at the right time. And then you have those other kids early on who just dominate. They're just huge, and they just crush everyone, and no one can keep up with them. But then like puberty hits and everyone goes by them. They don't really grow much more. They go from being above average to just average kids. So what I try to do is I use the assessment when a kid comes in. I use the assessment as like a kind of a tool to say to the dad or the mom, like, look, this is not, he can't do this. He can't do a push-up. He can't do a lunge without falling over. He can't stand on one leg. And I try to just basically everything we just talked about. Like, I have to start from the beginning. Like, every athlete should have good balance. Every athlete should have good coordination. Every athlete should have decent level of relative strength. And so I show them, and I try to explain to them, like, if you can bring these things up, if you can get these things better, your son or daughter will benefit down the line so much more. But yeah, that I am very vocal about it, and I try to get it out to everyone I can. But it's probably why I'm so vocal, because it's a tough conversation to have when people have invested so much time and so much money into something like that.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, because a lot of times people in our profession preach to the choir, and it's like, yeah, we all get this message, but how do you articulate that in a way to a parent or a coach that's going to resonate with them? And I like your idea of objectively showing them things that kids have trouble with, because even as a medical person, like, one of the biggest things that I see, and you talked about the potential for injury, is you've got athletes that from a movement standpoint can do calculus, but they can't add 2 + 2. So if you're 13 years old and you can throw 75 miles an hour, but you can't do a push-up, that's probably a disconnect it's not good. I mean, you should still, everyone talks about like, having a general movement skills is going to take away from specialization. Being able to do a push-up properly is not going to make you throw less hard. But I would argue that not being able to do a push-up properly sets you up for injury down the road if you can throw hard, because you can throw hard independently of, or jump high independently of having that general movement base. Is when you have too much of that discrepancy that I think it could be problematic. So again, just like you, I mean, I'm teaching even really high level, sometimes professional athletes, how to do things they should have gotten in sixth grade. I'm not doing anything magical. And then I think another thing that I want you to talk about, because a lot of times people say, oh, well, kids shouldn't play one sport 9 or 10 years, 10 months out of the year. But so it's okay for them to play competitive, super competitive football, basketball, baseball, all these different sports really competitively. So can you talk about how the answer to this specialization problem is not having kids necessarily play highly competitive, organized sports throughout the year, even if they're different? Because I think that's a really important distinction that some people don't make.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I have a basketball kid who he's going to go to play college next year at Clark University, and I begged him to play football. He's like, well, I'm not going to go to college to play football. And I said, just listen, you need to just do something different for a little bit, because he was starting to break down. You got basketball all winter, and then you play AAU all spring, and then you got AAU and camps that those guys go to all summer. And he was just, you could see him losing weight and not kind of moving the way he should. He was always bound up because he was playing so much. I was like, dude, just play. You're a good athlete. You sit out there, you catch some passes, make some tackles. Take this couple months as a break and just go have fun. And he did that. And I said, you can still play hoops. You can go after practice and go shoot around, but it's you're not at this crazy intensity where you're going all out competing all the time. And for him, it ended up being a really great thing. He got the break he needed. He got to do kind of different movements, because football, they're not totally different, but you're playing on grass instead of a hard court. He played receiver, so he wasn't in the mix where he was getting his head taken off all the time, every play, smashing helmets. And so it was a nice break. And then the other thing was he wasn't, playing pickup hoops every day after school. He was at football practice, but he did get to go out on his own every couple of days on the weekends. He would practice on his own and really bring up his game by working on his weak points by himself. And it was a really nice, it ended up being great. He had the best season he could possibly have his senior year which is weird, right? He didn't practice that much in the fall, ended up having his best season he could have in the winter by not playing basketball, And the kid, I have to say, loves the weight room. So he's one of those kids that knows the importance of mobility and stretching and core work, and he does it all. He kind of is one of those kids I don't even have to talk to anymore. He just like a robot. He just comes in and gets it done. So, I'm a huge younger kids. I'm a huge believer in getting kids to play multiple sports. And it's just hard. It's hard to explain to kids that are ultra competitive to do something just for fun, But what's interesting? I get a lot of kids that may specialize or play one sport a lot during the year, and I don't actually see them until the issue starts to come up. For whatever reason, a kid will start to have elbow pain, and instead of going to his ortho or his doctor, his parents will come in and start talking to me about his elbow pain because he's pitching 9 months a year. So I get him in and I just start doing basic stuff. I keep away from anything he has pain. I try to usually refer him to a PT, but just getting them that break from baseball and throwing, a lot of times when you have a young kid, the issues start to clean up and you start to get them a little bit stronger, a little bit more athletic, things like that. So there's certain sports I feel like I see that those kids, the parents and the coaches, they often wait until something comes up to take care of the issue. Baseball is one of them. You see the kid, especially you're starting to see it more and more with Tommy John. Kids are throwing so much. I've seen it. I've had 11-year-old kids in with with issues with their elbow, And one of my things was like, well, parents ask me what he should do in the fall. I tell him he should be playing soccer. What else? Great sport, great conditioning, and not any use of the upper body. You're pretty much primarily lower body as far as how the game is played. So, yeah, it's a youth sports. It's an interesting. It's just so there's so much. There's so many different sports. It's so big now. There's so much money involved. There's so many people, parents and coaches, and there's so many issues that are starting to pop up. I won't be surprised in a year, down the line where you're seeing PTs and especially physical therapists and doctors just primarily focusing on just youth alone,
Yeah, and you make a great point, because even in the instance of the basketball player you mentioned who played football, the idea is to do something just for the sake of novelty and for fun. So it's not like if you're a parent and you have a little leaguer who normally plays baseball 10 months a year, playing basketball in the winter or soccer in the fall might be good, but playing on 3 or 4 different travel teams while you're playing soccer is not good. So it's like anything can be taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
And a lot of these parents hear that message, play multiple sports, and it's like, okay, so that means that we have to be on, like I said, multiple travel teams. And it's like, no, the point is variety, because now you're creating another overuse injury potential situation. So I think we have to be really careful about the message, because a lot of times parents and even coaches and athletes only hear what they want to hear. So if you're not very clear with that message, then it gets misinterpreted. And I think that segues nicely into, I want to talk about play and unstructured games a little bit. I know you're a big proponent of that. And I think so. Why are play and unstructured games important? And then the follow-on question is, as a coach, how do you know when to just let kids play and figure things out on their own versus when to intervene and actually teach them something?
Sure. So, free play and games, free play, even pickup, things like that. There's no coach involved. The kids are basically left to figure out the rules themselves. They got to figure out any, issues between each other. And they are often a lot more relaxed because there's no one looking over their shoulder telling them they're going to make a mistake. And so you really get to see kids in their own element. You see them a lot more relaxed. And when they are relaxed, you get to see kind of really how well they move. You can, I know there's a lot of kids that when someone's watching them or when they're being coached, they don't want to make a mistake. And so they freeze or they won't do the things that they should do. Whereas if you just send a bunch of kids outside and you're looking through the window and they don't know you're watching, you'll see a totally different kid. But the part I talked about, them, especially younger kids, having to work out their own issues, make up their own rules, those are all things that they're going to have to do when they're older, when they're adults. They're going to have to get along with people. They're going to have to compromise. They're going to have to, someone's going to lose and someone's going to win. So those are really just life things, important life lessons that you learn through free play and games and pickup games and things like that. So that's huge for me. And I try to tell everyone, parents, kids, you name it, to go out and do those things as much as possible. And like I said, the other thing is the when you are relaxed and you are in your own element, you learn faster, you learn more efficiently. You pick up the game. You pick up the game a lot easier. If it's fun, right? If it's fun for a kid, then they're going to play that sport longer. They're going to be out there, instead of a sport practice where you're only allowed an hour because the older team's coming in next and all these other teams have practice after you. You're in your backyard. You could be out there playing for hours, and you get to stop when you want to. That's the other thing, playing free play and games. It's all based on the interaction between the kids. When a kid gets tired, he can stop and go get a drink instead of asking the coach or having to wait for a water break. They can just go and do it, get a drink and jump back in the game. If a kid's being a jerk, or the couple of kids are being a jerk, that game ends because the other kids don't want to play with kids that are being jerks. And so, you kind of figure things out, and they, like I said before, they have to compromise. So there's so much going on with, pickup games and free play and just going outside. That's the thing with when you see two kids, like parents freak out, right? Like, oh, look at them two wrestling. Like my two boys wrestle all the time. But if you really listen, they're laughing. And so there's nothing like malicious going on at all. They're laughing and joking and they're having a good time wrestling each other. And yeah, does it turn into sometimes one of them goes too far? Yep. But you know what? When they go too far and the other one cries and I do have to intervene, the one who caused the issue learns like, oh, I can't go that far. You learn how to deal with people. You learn how to, you learn boundaries. If you're always keeping people away from each other, they're never going to learn those boundaries. So, a lot of times if you read like a lot of the child psychology books, they talk about kids wrestling each other, boys wrestling each other, and it's really like they're just showing affection for each other. They're friends, and they're wrestling because they get along great, and they really enjoy being each other's company, and they learn from each other. And so, like, I'll give you the best story. I had a group of 12 kids, 12 boys. They were in my facility between the ages of second grade and fourth grade, right? And so I was running a little behind. So I had this older group finishing up their training session, and the 12 boys were kind of waiting. And so I had this in my old facility. I used to have this like little foyer area where everyone kind of waited till their next training session. So I told the boys, I said, listen, you guys go over here, wait 5 minutes. I'm almost done with this session and we're going to start. And so I turn around and I start coaching, finishing up the older kids group. And right when I finish, I turn around and there's the 12 boys, and no lie, it's like 6-on-6 wrestling match. All 12 boys were like wrestling, each other on the floor, and every kid was just laughing and having a blast. And honestly, I thought it was so awesome that I just basically stood there for the next like 10, 15 minutes. And that was like their warm up because it was great. The kids were just so engaged in what they were doing and having a blast. And obviously wrestling is, they don't think so. They don't even realize it, but it's coordination and strength training and conditioning all in one, so they get done after 15 minutes of that, and they're huffing and puffing and sweating and all good things are happening. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to something I'm really passionate about.
No, that's a really awesome answer. And then I know that obviously you're really big on like obstacle courses. So essentially you create free play, unstructured scenarios in your gym where you manipulate the environment, and then you have the kid or the athlete try to work out the problem on his or her own. And so, but then again, when you work with higher level athletes, you'll actually probably do a lot more coaching where you're saying, all right, this is how I want you to come in and out of the cut. So at what point do you figure out like when it's okay for you as a coach to intervene versus when you want the kid to figure it out on his or her own? Is it an age thing? So do you say, hey, when you're 10 years and younger, I'm going to let you just figure it out on your own. And then when you're older, I'm going to coach you. How do you know when to coach versus how do you know when people should just play and figure it out on their own?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I think I've seen, it can be all across the board, but I've seen it start to make that transition where in my own facility, I should say, I start to make that transition between like 5th and 6th grade. Okay. I start to see like maturity levels start to come around and be able to, the kids can start to take part and more organized, and they can focus a little bit more. So up until that point, though, I typically, I'll do things with 4th graders, 3rd and 4th graders where we do take time, 5 to 10 minutes, and work on like, basic movements. We might do like a push-up or a lunge or a squat just to try to, but to be honest, like sometimes with those groups, it all depends on how they are that day. They might not be digging that. And if they're not, I'm not like sitting there screaming at them and getting mad and be like, oh no, we need to learn how to squat. No, I'm not like that. All right, well, if you guys aren't focusing today, let's hit up an O course, or let's hit up let's start doing a Let's start doing a relay race. Let's play a game of tag with the flags. You have to pull a flag, or we'll partner up and play team tag. If it's not, if their focus isn't there, I'll change it in a heartbeat and get something that really engages them. You know what I mean? So same thing with like conditioning, right? I'll talk about conditioning, how important it is. If the kids are sitting that much in school every day, it's my belief. I'm like, yeah, these kids really do need to condition, but I'm not going to like throw some cones down and start running 300-yard shuttles. But you know what? I can play a game of pickle, right? We can get kids in the middle running back and forth between bases, and they'll run 300 yards playing that game and not even know it. They'll have no idea, but we just got the same benefit. They'll leave the gym laughing, sweating. They'll get competitive over it. The kid gets hit. Oh, you didn't hit me. Another kid catches the ball. Everyone can come back in the game. We changed the name of the pickle. Now we call it runners and gunners to make it a little bit more exciting. But, you can do those things. You can get a kind of a training effect by implementing different types of games and movement skills. And you know what? A lot of times with the older kids, I'll actually we'll take a 5-minute period where we do, some type of like start and stop drill, some type of like change of direction drill. And I'll be like, yeah, we're going to come to this cone and cut. We're going to come to this cone and cut. I want to see you plant. I want to see you twist. I want to see you do this and this here. But then I'll be like, all right, now we're going to play, now we're going to do 10 minutes of tag. And I want to, kind of put those movement skills to a test. Same thing with sprinting. Like we'll do maybe a resisted run. We'll do like a skip for height. We're going to kind of hammer away at technique. I want to see them driving their foot through the floor. I want to see arm action, things like that. But then I'm going to line the kids up and be like, all right, you two, I want you two to chase each other. You run from your belly. You're going to chase from behind. See if you can catch them. So we're going to, at once, with the older kids, I'm going to take the teaching. We're going to take this 5-minute period and do that stuff. But we're also going to then try to take what we just learned and put it into real practice. So I would say that's probably a huge difference between if you came into the facility, right, and you were watching, you'd see the 3rd and 4th graders just always kind of ripping around doing games and obstacle courses and things like that, where you just see the older kids, it's a little bit more organized, but at the end of it, you'll see similar things we did with the younger kids. And like they get fired up. Like, high school kids, football guys come in and they get amped up to like chase each other, to see who can catch each other, who can pull each other's flag. Like they love that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. And I remember just watching some of your videos of how you train youth athletes and thinking even more adults should train like this because it's actually fun. I mean, we make strength and conditioning and physical preparation so complicated sometimes and frankly so boring when, we can read a research study and say, well, someone has to do, 400 meters of speed development today, but it's like you can create games and scenarios and competitive environments where you can get that same volume in a way where it's not nearly as monotonous and boring. And I think that that's something that we don't do enough of, which is why, again, I think it's really cool that even in your higher level athletes and your older athletes, you're still incorporating some of that play after you do the more structured coaching type things. I wonder. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, so I have a, and one of the things that bothered me is that I felt like, one, my facility was too small, but two, sometimes because you are a private place, you don't get access to a lot of like more kids. And so actually 3 years ago, I started basically it's like a free speed and agility camp that I do. Like 2 nights a week during the summer, I show up at a field and like whoever wants to come comes. And I might get 10 kids. That's usually football guys that come down, but I might get 10 kids. I might get 50. So I put it out there. I put it out on social media, in the area, and we get kids from all different high schools. And pretty much what we do when we're there is that type of stuff, and we've had adults join us. We've had high school kids. We've had middle school kids, college. We've never had a pro guy show up. That'd be great. But, we spend, I guess I get a bigger platform and I get more kids who get exposed to that type of stuff. Not only do we work on the typical, movement skill and teaching, but then the things we just talked about, we have like these massive games of tag. We have like full field relay races, and it's just awesome to see, and it's awesome to be a part of.
Yeah.
So,
And then I want to switch gears a little bit because you talked about the classroom, right? And even earlier on, you alluded to the fact that there's more and more of an emphasis on academics in schools. And
yep.
the idea is if you cut physical education, if you don't give kids opportunities to move, they're going to spend more time in the classroom and presumably get smarter and learn more. But that isn't
Yep.
even necessarily true. I mean, I think that's something that we've kind of concluded without much data. But you've come across a lot of data to suggest that actually moving more improves learning. So can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think the idea is sometimes we can spend less time in the classroom and actually retain information better if we're doing some of the things that you advocate.
Sure. Well, I think so going back to, so if you talk to a lot of OTs, and I try to talk to as many as I can, especially the ones at the school, because when I get a child that comes in, they'll tell you right away that there's a significant, like the kids who are struggling in school have definitely some type of deficit when it comes to coordination, balance, strength, things like that. And when I mean strength, I'm not talking about like, being able to lift weights, but being able to sit up for, say 5 minutes without having to slouch over or falling out of their seat. They're lacking, spatial awareness. They're lacking, they might have some sensory issues going on, things like that. So I think what you're seeing is children that's struggling in school, there's a direct correlation, or maybe indirect, to, their physical development, their how their nervous systems, wired, their coordination, things like that. So if you can improve those things, I think if you can get a kid's posture better, you can improve his coordination, you make his balance better, he'll be able to sit in class and be able to pay attention longer, and be able to retain information, the information that's being presented to him. If a kid is not, if he's weak, if he's always fidgeting in his chair because he can never get comfortable, because he's not strong enough to be able, like, I think it was Kelly Starrett, right? I think he said something about, like, one time it was like the hardest things for humans to do is like to be able to sit still for long periods of time. It's like one of the hardest things to do. Well, you're asking like 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids to be able to sit still for a long period of time. You know what I mean? So if adults can't do it, how are you ever going to think a kid's going to do it? And so what they're seeing is that the kids that are having trouble, who are struggling, tend to not have these basic really basic kind of movement skill, I guess, strength, balance in place. There's a great book by Sally Blythe. It's called Attention, Balance, and Coordination. And the whole book's basically about like how she calls it neuromotor immaturity. And so how, these kids, she believes like some of these kids who are struggling in school, their nervous systems are not up to speed. And and it manifests itself physically. And they can't really retain information because they're basically always trying to find a kind of comfort zone when they're in class. And that might be fidgeting. It might be dozing off, looking out in space. It might be putting your head down. Some kids get really tired when they sit for long periods of time because it might be a vestibular issue. There's a lot going on. This is like this could be a whole other industry that we could talk about as far as, training or development, occupational therapy for children, and it's huge, right? Like you read about some of the articles online. I mean, some of these schools are just busting out the seams with kids who need help from the OTs, and the OTs are like totally overworked. So I think what you're seeing is that a lot of kids are entering school, and then while they're in school, so they're entering school unprepared physically because they're not kind of getting exposed to free play and playgrounds and running around and all those things. And then when they're getting in school, now we're asking them to sit for longer periods of time and not getting access to recess and to physical education. So I think actually it starts before they even get into school.
I think you made me think of that in a totally different way, because I think the idea, and even though they mean well, they're a little bit misguided, is that you can always throw more resources at a problem and say, if we do more of this, we're going to get better. But I think what you're kind of suggesting is that you have these kids who effectively can't even handle the amount of school and academics that they're already being asked to do. And now we're saying, well, you're behind, so we're going to make you do more of it. It's kind of like saying, from a physical standpoint, you can't handle the volume of training we're giving you right now, but because you're behind, we're going to make you train more. It actually makes no sense at all. So we're saying that more is better, but they can't even handle what's being asked of them right now. And I think as a population, right, like kids are already so overtasked, whether it's with academics, extracurricular activities, and now we're saying, well, we need you to spend more time in a classroom. And again, I think it's easy from a political standpoint to say, look, we've addressed the problem. Kids are staying in school more. We cut phys ed. When, again, that I'm not saying that can never work, but I don't think we should assume that it's going to work. We should actually study it and have data. And I think that the things that you're pointing out, I think warrant certainly further investigation before we can jump to a drastic conclusion and say we need to spend more time sitting in the classroom, where we already do it more than a lot of other countries anyway, countries that we're behind in academically. I think that's kind of like the American way a lot of times, is like, just do more, work harder, and a lot of sometimes you can't outwork a problem. You have to find a smarter solution.
Sure. I mean, it's crazy to think like, okay, you have a kid who's struggling in class. He's like, his writing's not very good because his fine motor skills aren't there. And then you look at his fine motor skills and notice that his gross skills are not there. And you're sending him to OT. So you've said that it's a physical problem, right? You have OTs at the school. You're sending that kid to occupational therapy to help those issues, right? So you're saying it is a physical issue, but on the other side of it, you're not allowing the other things, you're not allowing more movement in recess and phys ed, the other two parts of like a child's kind of day that he should have access to. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, and
it's like
at least some kids are actually getting OT, but they're like the worst cases. I mean, they're the ones where they found something pathological, but I think this stuff exists on a continuum. Just because there are kids who haven't been diagnosed with a pathology where they have to go see an OT, the quote unquote normal kid can still benefit from more movement. It's not like, everyone, like, you can tolerate sitting in a classroom for 8 hours a day without moving, and then you reach a point of pathology where it's like, okay, now you have to move. I think, again, it's a continuum where not everybody needs to go to OT, but I think it's fair to say that not everyone should have phys ed and sports completely cut out of their curriculums either. So I think we kind of like, we do well with people at the extremes, but we don't address the people, the normal people in the middle. So yeah, I mean,
what about the kid?
Yeah.
What about the kid who just is under the radar, who just skates by?
Yep.
Everyone says that kid, everyone talks about that kid that was me to a T in school. Like, you're not working hard enough. You need to study more. You need to do more because you're just getting by. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe that's not it. Maybe there's something else there. So, and I think those kids get overlooked pretty easy. That's in that book, Attention, Balance, Coordination. That's really what she's actually talking about. Is not the kids that are, that they find with the huge issues. It's the kids these tiny issues that you wouldn't even know are there. When you ask this kid, the kid who's just skating by, to like stand on 1 foot for 10 seconds and he falls over. Like so she came up with this, basically an assessment to check kind of neuromotor maturity. And some of them were like, heel toe walk, simple stuff. Can you cross the midline? And she was finding like some of these kids who are just getting by, are lacking these very simple skills. And so she's making the case for like, movement. This lady basically comes up with a training program that you can actually do in your classroom, which is a whole other thing we can talk about as well. So the kids have access to it, and they do it every day for like, say 10 to 15 minutes. And it's all simple stuff, again, balancing, some kind of yoga movements, different things like that allow kids to move through different ranges of motion in different directions. Allows them to get on the ground, on their back, to roll, stand up, all these different things that they're not getting kind of, I guess, exposed to on a daily basis. So, and that going further, we can talk about kind of like what the classroom of the future should be to take care of these problems.
Yeah, that's it. No, and what's really cool about that is, like, you're saying this assessment. It's not, you're not asking to get to dunk a basketball or do a backflip. It's like,
right.
Can you basically pass a sobriety test essentially? So you have these kids who can't pass like a field sobriety test is what it amounts to, and then you're saying, well, why can't you learn in class? I mean, it's that discrepancy between, maybe you're having someone do algebra in a classroom, but the person who can do algebra should still be able to walk heel toe, right?
Yep.
So when you get these gross discrepancies, you can look at even academics as a specialization, right? When you get so academically myopic that that's all you focus on and you lack this general coordination, it's the same nervous system that's helping you learn, that's helping you walk heel toe, right? So again, we're not saying that everybody has to be able to do a backflip, but it's just when you neglect these basic skills, I think that it's kind of the whole adaptation thing from a resiliency standpoint and an adaptation standpoint. The more you lose that variability in those basic skills, then you're less adaptable to any kind of stress, whether it's an academic stress or a physical stress. So again, I never thought about it that way until you put it in those terms. So I kind of, we're wrapping it up here. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about, you basically have a platform, like you're in charge of educating coaches, sport coaches, physical education teachers, and fitness professionals. Like, what kind of curriculum, what are the things that you think they need to effectively address some of these long-term developmental issues? And then even how does that segue into just training for performance, right? Because I think a lot of times the basics are neglected. And even in the fitness curriculums, we're focusing on like periodization and should we do 3 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 3? And when again, some of these basic things are being neglected. So what do you think are some important resources or things that people should get from an educational standpoint if they want to get into this field?
I think it would benefit any up and coming coach to dive into elementary physical education. I think it's one of those things that I use with everybody, even adults, but even the older athletes. But being able to study and have a look at elementary phys ed and how it's structured and set up, and for me, like when I look at periodization, it's all it is a lesson plan. It's a lesson plan and how those lesson plans connect to each other over time. You know what I mean? So you can put in all the volume and intensity and levels and all that when you start getting into really, lifting weights and strength training and all that. But really for me, when I look at a session or multiple sessions and how I'm going to work with people, I just kind of look at it as like, what am I going to work on that day? And how does that day connect with yesterday? And how does today connect to tomorrow and tomorrow to next week? So I think a lot of that comes from me wanting to be a phys ed teacher at one point, or just being a teacher and learning some of that stuff. So as a coach, I think even if you want to be the top level coach at Division I school or professional, it's really, I think, important to learn that type of phys ed, because phys ed, I mean, that's the foundation. That's where it all starts. Every athlete that you get down the line should have went through this developmental process. And so if you're going to be a coach, I think it's important to know that stuff. I mean, you don't have to like dive into it a ton, but just having it as a resource and looking up and learning those things. And even I think you can appreciate, if you can coach a group of 9-year-olds, you have an appreciation for, you'll have a better appreciation for working with, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And so I've been really lucky that I've been able to, on both sides, I got no problem working with a football team, and I got no problem working with 9-year-olds. Like, for me, I can do either one. That's not a big difference. I mean, I'm probably more comfortable working with the younger kids, but I'm just so glad as a coach to be able to access those things, But I was going to say, I think there's like, in the fitness industry, there's like this, something gets popular, some type of training program or some type of organization that does a really good job with a certain type of training. So like with you guys, like what's the what's it, PRI? PRI is really big right now, and I know a lot of coaches are learning that stuff. And I've had guys tell me, like, you need to learn this stuff. But for me right now, I'm into this elementary school, like gymnastic, like trying to teach gymnastic things. So I've been getting all these books, and basically all my time has been spent on, educational gymnastics. And so it's not that I don't like, PRI or FMS or any of that stuff. It's just for me right now, I'm like, where my focus is somewhere else, and I always tell coaches, like, just follow your heart and get into those things. Like, there's something, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing, or, you don't always have to do what's super popular right now. You can get to that later on, maybe in your, what you're doing as a business or professionally. That stuff might not even, be useful. Find out what you need right now and learn it and attack it. So.
No, and again, yeah. I think those are great points, and I think my thinking has evolved kind of more along the lines of where you're going, in that a lot of times different professions try to act as though they're solving unique problems, right? So in strength and conditioning, or even PT, we use terms like physical preparation or periodization, which, like you said, that's just a lesson plan. All right. So, or even physical education. A lot of strength and conditioning coaches are like, physical education, but physical education is just GPP. So all these different people or fields are inventing their own language to talk about the same thing. So even if you talk about like PRI and FMS, I think those are cool things, but again, they have their own language, when if you really break it down, they're all talking about the same thing. And it's the same thing as what gymnastics is telling you when you study gymnastics. So yes, there are certain things that are unique about each of those different disciplines and systems, but the commonalities are vast. The differences, I think, are few. And I think the more, we take that global approach to things and realize that things aren't really that different, and that a lot of people are trying to solve the same problems, that actually is much more of a conversation generator than when people are very tribal and it's like, oh, you don't do PRI or the FMS, you're studying physical education. It's like, PRI and FMS is physical education. They're basically trying to get you to, get joints to move in good positions, which is all gymnastics is trying to get you to do, or track and field with hurdle mobility. So it's all the same thing. And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people act like what they're doing is so different, because it's not that different. Human movement's human movement. Nobody copyrighted it,
Yeah. Love it. I love it. Yep. For me, I just think I have to go with what, what motivates me and what engages me at the time. So, if I pick up a book and I get into it, and if that's what I like at that time, that's what I'm going to do. And one of these days I might get into FMS was something that I tried to get into once. I don't know a ton of it. It didn't pull me in like it did for other people. But then I got into like the PCA type stuff, which is very similar. I just kind of, I don't know, the guy, Kelvin Giles, he's a, great writer and great coach. And I just kind of was engaged with the things that he said. But like you just said, when you look at both systems and both ways to assess someone, they're almost the same thing. I mean, you're looking at, it's just movement, So I think you're right on the money. It's just kind of basically what it comes down to is what each person, what they want to, what engages them, and what gets them excited about learning.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's basically what is it that you're actually going to do, and what's going to inspire you to learn more. And if again, they're all pretty much doing the same thing, so it's all good if you look at it from that standpoint. And like if you're in the other thing too is like, so for me, a lot of the coaches that come in and help me are phys ed teachers, like, because it's a great little like extra job for them to come in and assist me in here. And so it's great because we, like you were just saying, we have kind of it's just a certain language between, what we're doing and what I'm trying to do in here and what they're doing in their physical education classes. You know what I mean? So we have our own little, we talk about educational gymnastics. We talk about, crawling and coordination development and things like that. And so there's probably things that you say in the physical therapy kind of world that is similar language between other therapists. You know what I mean? Yep.
So,
yeah, and the key thing is, I mean, like sometimes you have to invent a new word or a new language to communicate a new idea. But I think a lot of times people use a new language to kind of make themselves, make what they do like more important than it really is. When it's like if we can speak the same language among different professions, there's no reason to make it more complicated than it has to be.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, how can people learn more about you and your work, your facility? I know we're kind of wrapping it up here, so can you get a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually on Facebook or Instagram and Twitter. It's just under my name, Jeremy Frisch, and is Achieve Performance Training as well. So you can find me on any of those kind of platforms. I usually post a lot of what we're doing with our younger athletes on Instagram, just because I think I find it a great resource to share with other coaches. And, I learn a lot. I see I see a lot of stuff you guys are doing all the time. And so I think it's great to be able to share little tidbits of information and give you little ideas on how to better structure training, things like that. So I'm usually there. I've written some articles here and there. I used to write for T Nation a long time ago, but I really don't have enough time to do that type of writing anymore. So typically it's great because, Twitter or Facebook, you can just do little blurbs here and there, what's on your mind and get it out there for people to read and see. I don't have a blog or anything like that because I just usually don't have time to write, and I'm not the best writer in the world. So, it's easier for me to be able to do just little blurbs here and there about what I'm thinking or what's happening in my training world.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for coming on just because, in our profession, a lot of times the best people are always motivated to work in Division I, collegiate setting, or in pro sports, when I think an argument can be made that the best coaches should be at the youth level, where, you can make much more of an impact because there's so many political factors and other reasons why even a really good strength and conditioning or physical preparation professional can't make that much of an impact at the pro level. And where you are right now, I think, is where our profession actually, again, can make more of an impact. So thanks again for your time, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
You got it, man.